So we're going to go to Geometry under the Edge Loop menu, and we're going to do this Panel Loops. Just using the defaults, I'm going to hit Panel Loops, and what that's going to do is if I turn off Polyframe and zoom in, you're going to see every single one of these is now its own separate panel with a bevel. It's kind of hard to see, so I'm going to undo that, and we're going to do a thickness on these panels of, instead of 0.01, we're going to do 0.1, and then hit Panel Loops. And then I can really see what we're getting here. I'm going to go into Polyframe, and let's go ahead and dissect this guy. So each one of these outer shells right here is its own polygroup. So if I hold down Control Shift and click, I can select that. And then it's also got an inside ring here. So every one of these has its own individual inside ring, as well as if we Control Shift click and then invert that, you're going to see there's an inside surface that's all one polygroup. And that's actually useful when you start organizing, and I'll tell you why when we get there. But just for now, if we hold down Control Shift and tap this one, this is this outside polygroup. If I want to get that inside ring, go over here to your loops, and by default that's set to 5. So if I go down here to Visibility and click Grow 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, you now have this outer panel and the bevel that it created, and these are all separate polygroups as well, but not the inside polygroup. Another cool thing you can do is if you want to, let's hold down Control Shift and bring everything back. If you want to look at the entire panel of this thing, you can Control Shift click it and then just do Grow All, and now you have the inside polygroup and the outside polygroup and the bevel that it created. And before I forget, if you actually go up here to Visibility and just roll over the Grow All, you're going to see the shortcut for that is Control Shift A. So if I bring everything back by holding Control Shift and tapping, if I Control Shift tap this, Control Shift A, it's very quick to get vert welded areas, vert welded sections of this, which is an entire panel. And where that actually comes into play as well is moving this guy around. So if I hit go into my Move brush, and I'm going to open up a docking station here, and I'm going to throw my brush menu in here. And if you go down here to Auto Masking, we're going to play around with these things a little bit. So the first thing we're going to do with the Move brush selected is turn on Topological. And what that means is, just like when I was explaining when we isolated this and then grew all, anything that's a vert welded complete object, if I click on that first and move it around, it's only going to affect that first complete object that I clicked. I'm just going to turn off Polyframe. And so if you want to embed this whole panel right here, like underneath, all you have to do is go in your Move brush, turn on Topological, and then if you click this first, you can actually just kind of move this around and move it inside this shape, no problem. If you want to go down here and make this one poke out, you can actually just grab that, and as long as you have Move Topological on, it's going to respect just that first full topology that you clicked on. So you can kind of position those out. However, if I turn Topological off and then start moving stuff around, you're all going to move as one coherent unit. So you can kind of go back and forth. And like I said when we were making the first Dynamesh kind of rough shape, is that you don't have to be exactly what you need before you go into panels. Even when you're in panels, you're going to have lots of leeway to kind of move this stuff around. And don't worry too much when you're moving stuff around that it gets lumpy, because you're always able to go back really quickly and do your polish by features and just kind of smooth everything back out. Another thing you can do, use to your advantage, is you can do this mask by polygroups. So if I go up here, so Topological's off. If I go up here to mask by polygroups, it's kind of the same principle. If whatever polygroup I click on first, so remember these top shells are a separate polygroup from the inside shells, which are a separate polygroup from the bevel rings right here. So if I just click on this one and then move it out, it's only going to stay on that polygroup. So you can actually do pretty wild things. So you can actually go ahead and let's go ahead and bump this out, make a brand new shape here. And don't be afraid to you can make some pretty drastic changes, and even if it doesn't look that great, remember you can always go back to your polish by features and kind of smooth. Oops, let's go ahead and make that an open circle. Polish by features and get a nice smooth transition out of there. So you can do pretty drastic stuff and still have it look pretty good after you've gone ahead and polished it. So you can use that to your advantage as well. And if you want to make big overall changes like we did with our Dynamesh, you can hit W, and you can actually just click and drag straight out and get a straight line. And then with W selected, you can just, oops, we actually have Mask by Polygroup still on. If you turn that off, you can make overall changes to the length, and if you click in the middle and drag out, and to the width of the entire object all at once. Let's go ahead and do a couple quick test renders now that we've got the basic overall shape and make sure everything's the way we like it. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn on this floor plane, and we're going to go to the draw menu, and this grid size, we're just going to crank that up. So when we render it, the BPR render, we're going to get a cast shadow down here. Here's your light, where you can position the light. And we're going to turn this S-Pix down to 0 because we're just doing a kind of a quick BPR render preview. I'm going to hit BPR. So here's our shadow and here's our object. Since this is kind of a nice smooth vehicle type object, let's go ahead and turn on a chrome and hit BPR. You're going to see it's kind of aliased, and it could be one of two things. The first thing I'm going to do is temporarily go up here to geometry, and I'm going to hit divide a couple times to make sure we get the smoothest possible geometry. And if you want to, you can actually go to deformation, and we're going to go to polish by features, and we're going to make that a little bit crisper even with all that geometry. And if we go in here, you're going to see it's not as aliased anymore, so we can hit BPR render. And so here we got our nice smooth metallic preview here. If we go to Chrome Blue Tint, you're going to see that it actually looks still a little bit aliased, and that's actually not the geometry. If we go to Matte Gray, you see there's plenty of nice smooth geometry here. Where that's probably coming in is if we go up to render properties, you're going to see details is set to 1. If you hold down Control, you get a nice long description of this, but basically this is a 512 map that's mapped to your preview reflection. Here's a 1024 when you set it to 2, and you're going to see it actually smoothed out in the preview window here. And then here's a 2048. So we can put this down to 2, and that way you won't notice if it's your geometry or your reflection. It's always nice and smooth. So we're going to go ahead and set that to 2. And if you want to as well, you can go up here to your render. Let's go to our render shadow, and you can move the global strength down if it's a little bit too dark. Turn the raise down to 1, a very small angle here, and you can kind of play the shadow settings here and hit BPR and kind of get a nice preview render. Change your material. So you can get a really nice render, really nice panels really quickly. And let's go ahead and go back to where before we went and subdivided here. So here we go. So now's, I guess, as good a time as any. Let's go ahead and see if we get that polish here. There we go. So now I guess as good a time as any to explain that, had I not been talking and explaining as I went, I could have gotten to this point right here in minutes, a very short period of time. However, modeling this in another package would have taken me, well, quite a bit more time, and it would have been much more difficult, if not impossible, to try out as many ideas or create tons and tons of variations for consideration. And this is like the basic power of ZBrush is right here, is creating this fast opens you up to so much more exploration than is possible with traditional techniques. So not only do you get the added benefit of creating variation upon variation while you explore, you also aren't bound to something that may not quite be what you want, but it was so time consuming to create that you go ahead and stick with good enough. These techniques are so fast, there's no reason that you have to settle for good enough anymore. So there's a whole lot of power in these new features right here as far as hard edge and beveling, and we've kind of just scratched the surface, and we're going to get a little bit deeper into that. I just wanted to explain that before we get too far.